411 Astrology Initiates. So today we're going to continue the book study of the outer planets and their cycles by Liz Green. We're on lecture 3. There's 7 lectures, and there's a couple cool parts about the age of Aquarius and the age of Pisces and all of that. Another quick thing that I want to say is, oh, Kim commented on one of the last videos and said, oh, you should put it in do not disturb mode. So I did that. There's only one person that can call through in case of an emergency. Because when I get a phone call, even if I push ignore and kick it out, it would mute the microphone. As you guys know, I was using one of my older devices as well sometimes, but the microphone isn't very good on that one. So we're going to try this. I let the one person know, hey, don't call me for an hour. I'll text you when you can call again. Just text me if you need to. So that would be my man. He usually calls me around certain times, like noon or 5, like lunchtime or when he gets off work. But today he just called me at like almost 2, and I'm like, oh, I was just about to hop on the live. So I let him know. So we'll try this out and see how it goes. And I think I might just do it because you know how everybody texts nowadays and barely anyone calls. I feel like I might on my phone, just like a little tangent, which actually leads me into something else I wanted to say before we get started. I might do like profiles where I just do my favorite people at all times because, like I said, no one hardly calls, so it'd be for emergencies, like my brother, my sister, my parents. Um, and then that way I could just weed out all those spam calls, you know. But anyways, some days I don't get any, and then other days it's like constant. Um, I was going to say Mercury retrograde, as much as we loathe it and we hate it, is a really good time for going back and fixing things. So it's like I've been having this issue, and I thought maybe too it might hit mute on here, and I kept meaning to check if that just gets, because if I hit mute right now, which you guys see me do sometimes to clear my throat, it will have like an X on this microphone symbol. So I was thinking maybe to look at that next time I get a phone call and make sure it's not doing that, and then maybe I could undo it. But oh well. Um, but Mercury retrograde is a good time, you know, it's a communications issue thing to fix things that you've been struggling with. So a lot of times I'll figure out, oh, I started a project during Mercury retrograde, and here we are 3 Mercury retrogrades later. Or maybe if it's because we have 3 a year, so maybe if it's like the fall, you know, the autumn Mercury retrograde, it might be the next autumn Mercury retrograde that I'm actually having breakthroughs on this thing that's been confusing me for a year, you know. And I know we're all at different levels with technology, so it's you know, we all have our different breakthroughs on different levels of that, I'm sure. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into the book again. I'm not quite sure where we left off yesterday, but I do have it bookmarked. So I'll just sort of start at the top here of this paragraph and see where it takes us. So she was talking about, she feels that when a planet, whether it's an inner or an outer planet, is not aspected, that it's sort of a blind spot for a person because they're not dealing with this planet very much. It just sort of pops up. The energy sort of pops up when there's a transit to it or something like that. That's sort of where we left off. So then she kind of, we're going over also in lecture 3, Hitler's birth chart. So she's going back to him, talking about his Pluto-Neptune conjunction. And then she was talking about how he has a Mars-Venus conjunction squaring Saturn. And we kind of left off yesterday with me saying that, especially in synastry, like if you're in a relationship with someone who you have a Saturn square with, if it's Saturn square Venus, it can work long-term depending on the other aspects. It can bring security. It'll bring a little bit of claustrophobia, but it also brings like a sense of comfort and security. Mars square Saturn, I generally don't think that works very well. Most couples don't work with it. But if you have this natally like Hitler did, especially if you have that great Venus-Mars conjunction, it can be where like all of your joy and all of your ambition is always overshadowed. Saturn also is the devil in tarot. So um, it could be where I was saying misery loves company, where he couldn't really fully enjoy his Venus Mars conjunction because of this authoritarian Saturn energy on him. So he had decided, I guess, or coped with this by projecting it onto the rest of the world and becoming one of the ultimate authoritarians, right? A dictator, so to speak. I don't know if they technically consider him a dictator, but we'll just go with that. Hi, Abigail. Hi, Talia. Hi, Emily. Okay, so that's where we left off here. Um, And so it says, I don't mean this. So this book is available on Amazon, used for about $80, and then brand new for about $150. So we're going over it here as a book study. I did look up Liz Green. She's still around. She writes the horoscopes on astro.com. And I think it's kind of an automated thing, but she created it, so it's pretty cool. You can read all about it there on her Wikipedia page. But all right, so oh, and one more thing before we jump into this. If you're single and you're looking, do be sure to check out moonmatch.love. There's some really good sales this month. If you use the promo code for Thanksgiving and my coupon code rotation411, you can get almost 50% off on entry. And you can still, just with the entry membership, you can run and see if you have any matches in there. Hi, Ellie from Iran. Hi, Iran. Okay, so um, okay, she says, I don't mean this in a literal demonic sense, because Pluto and Neptune are not inherently evil, but in a psychological sense, something unconscious and very potent swamps the ego and takes control. It overwhelms the ego and floods in and takes over, twisting all the personal energies to its own ends. This is psychological possession. So she's saying the Pluto Neptune conjunction in Hitler's birth chart could have possibly created a psychological possession. um, Neptune kind of being the subconscious. Well, they're both subconscious, Pluto and Neptune, but Pluto's sort of the subconscious known thing. So, like, if we're digging through your subconscious, like your childhood traumas, Pluto is going to know what these things are, even if he keeps them hidden most of the time. So, it's like some kind of repressed memory could be a Pluto subconscious thing, but Neptune is more of stuff that's affected you that you don't even realize, that you may never be able to uncover. Uh, we're reading The Outer Planets and Their Cycles. Okay, so uh, this is a psychological possession. One of the more lurid examples of this is psychiatric literature is a situation of multiple personality, where the autonomous psychic images are completely disconnected from each other and take turns in expressing through the person's mouth. This is common enough. This is common enough, although less flamboyant, in cases of hysterical dissociation, where the person cannot remember the giddy, giggling, volatile person he was 15 minutes ago, or where he goes on a drinking binge and then cannot remember anything at all, not only of what he said or did, but of why he even began it in the first place. So to me, I've never heard of this hysterical dissociation. I've heard of this maybe in terms of hysteria, which is what Freud diagnosed like the housewives with, because they weren't able to. He used talk therapy. That's where talk therapy comes from, because they would, when they would lay on the couch and just talk and talk and talk, it was sort of cathartic and purging for them, because they were housewives and they were always trying to be, perfect around the house and didn't really vent to their husbands, I guess, is sort of the theory behind that. But and then the other thing, as far as she's describing this thing called hysterical dissociation, is also bipolar disorder, is what it reminds me of. When someone's like on a manic episode, they'll go and have a drinking binge, or maybe not remember what they did. A little bit of delusion can set in. I'm not saying all people that are bipolar are delusional, but in a state of mania or manic, they might be a little bit disassociated, like what she's saying. So I don't know this exact terminology she's using, but it reminds me of those sort of symptoms and those disorders. Ali, I'm from the West Coast of the United States. Okay, so in all these cases, something in the unconscious breaks through the barrier and takes possession of the ego. If a person is relatively aware, it is tormenting because it's experienced as a terrible compulsion. Or he may develop amnesia about it, or let it just disappear altogether. When it's an outer planet, then the thing that floods in is something very collective. There's a film called The Triumph of the Will, which was made as a propaganda film by the Nazi Party, which is a rather terrifying visual enactment of what I am talking about. You can see Hitler preparing to give a speech to an audience. I've never heard of this, so it's interesting. He stands rather diffidently in the background, obviously unsure of himself. Like I said yesterday with his, I believe, which planet was it? He has his sun, or no. He has his Venus-Mars conjunction in opposition to Uranus, it looks like. She was saying something else yesterday, but that looks like the tighter orb. So I feel like he would be very impulsive with, if it's Mars opposition Uranus, in his actions. So I don't think that his actions were necessarily well thought through a lot of the time. But because of how much power he had, that's why it was able to create so much, collateral damage and catastrophe. One second. Okay, so um, you can see him preparing to give a speech. He stands rather diffidently in the background, obviously unsure of himself, very eager to please. He climbs up to the podium and smiles and dimples and shuffles a bit. You can see the Libra ascendant. That's exactly what I was just going to say. It sounds a lot like a Libra ascendant. We were talking about that yesterday as well. And I got a little mixed up. I know I was saying Kamala Harris, her sun is 27 degrees Libra. I think I was saying her ascendant. It was Anna Nicole Smith and Hitler have their ascendant at 27 degrees Libra. I'm a 0 degrees Libra ascendant. So I was saying, this is why, whether they, for right or wrong, good or bad, or we're able to charm the masses. But there is something about fame at 27 degrees Libra. I'm fine. Well, just with these three that I've come across. And when I Google what, and we talked about this a little yesterday, when I Google what is 27 degrees, it's close to the, now I forgot, spaced it again. You guys can watch the end of yesterday's video. It was lecture 3, part 1 or 2, that I was talking about it in depth. But yes, when she said he's eager to please, right there, I thought, okay, that's his Libra rising, and that's right what she went to next. So she was setting us up for that. I'm just gonna read what Ali said. Finally, I should tell you that I don't understand what you're saying. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a little bit of a language barrier, and my English, whether I'm on the north side of the the north of the United States, people go, "Where's your accent from?" And I go, "I don't know, Canada." And then when I'm on the southern side of the United States, people say, "Where's your accent from? Are you from Europe?" And I just speak a lot of Spanish. I don't know. I have my own accent, I guess. It is a little bit Pacific Northwest. If you compare it to other people, people will say, someone commented once, and I get this sometimes, that I remind them of Anna Faris, which, if you know me well, our personalities are nothing alike, but it might be that Pacific Northwest accent slightly being in there. So, because she's from kind of close to where I'm from, like 5 hours away. So anyways, or maybe 6 hours. All right, so I think it's more of the cadence and the rhythm of the speech, but I don't know. So some of my words may get dropped a little in the AI translate. So I'm sorry, Ali, but hopefully you can get the gist of it. All right, so he's eager to please and he shuffles about a bit. You can see the Libra ascendant in all the shuffling and shyness and fear that people won't like him. He begins to speak in a fairly ordinary voice. Then something begins to happen. Remember, he has Uranus right there too. His gestures change completely and begin to become rather jerky. That does sound kind of Uranian, right? And his voice alters and his eyes glaze over. You can see the tenant in the basement rising up to take control of the house. So this is where we left off yesterday. It's an unaspected planet. She's saying his Pluto-Neptune conjunction is unaspected by other planets. They're aspecting each other, I would argue there, but because they're not aspected by any other parts of his chart, she's saying right here you can see the Pluto-Neptune conjunction sort of rising up, disconnected from other parts of his chart. So she's saying in this illustration, in this propaganda video, is where we can see clearly his Pluto-Neptune conjunction sort of coming to the surface and taking over, especially because it is generational. It's dealing with the masses. Okay. You can see the tenant in the basement taking over. All of a sudden, this rather shy and diffident man begins to radiate immense charismatic power. He is giving voice to what everyone in the audience is caught by. They are all in a state of participation mystique, and the collective vision has taken possession of them all. So this is some sort of Neptune conjunct Pluto collective vision. I don't know what you mean by is the country expensive. I guess it would be relative, to other countries. Um, anyways, okay. Neptune, as I mentioned before, is connected with dreams and religious longings, the yearning for a return to the source. Pluto is connected with the urge for destruction and renewal. the tearing down of the old world order so that something new might be born. If you put these two principles together, what you have essentially is a religious or mystical movement which is dedicated to the destruction and rebuilding of society. There was a missing is there. A little bit of a typo. So she's saying Neptune is connected with dreams and religious longings, and Pluto is renewal. So this would be sort of like a new world order type of energy. It's a religious or mystical movement which is dedicated to the destruction and rebuilding of society. I think this is very literally what Hitler attempted to perpetrate as the vision of National Socialism. He was the figurehead for a tremendous dictatorial mystical cult. See, I didn't really think of it as that religious. I know it was tied to Christianity because when I was younger, I didn't understand why like German Christians had bought into Nazism. So, she's saying this was sort of a mystical, spiritual movement along with a dictatorial movement. So, she's saying Neptune is religion. So I guess that would be how Christianity sort of got involved. So it wasn't like the traditional Christianity. It was sort of it took on its own form. So the Pluto side of it says something like, quote, the new world must be created. The old one must be utterly annihilated, and all elements which taint or spoil it must be destroyed. The Neptune side says, quote, the new Superman is God's chosen vessel. He is the vessel for light. He is the embodiment of God on earth and rules by sacred right, end quote. So Neptune can be a bit deceptive and put us under illusion on the shadow side. So this could be why people might have glorified someone, so malicious. Someone who is out to destroy and rebuild, with Pluto being right there. This conjunction is bumping around here unaspected in the 8th house, which is Pluto's house. It's happening in the sign of Taurus. Okay, we said that yesterday, but and this, so Hitler, because he's a Libra rising, he has a reverse natural chart. So are these intercepted? One second. I think, oh, they're actually happening in Gemini, intercepted. Now, some astrologists we were talking about consider an interception like if Gemini starts and ends in his 8th house, but it only starts. So his 8th house cusp is Taurus, and then we have Neptune at 0 degrees Gemini and Pluto at 4 degrees Gemini. But Gemini is on the cusp of his 9th house. So Gemini, I consider that still interception or intercepted planets. Some astrologists would say it's only intercepted if the 9th house, if Gemini is not on basically a cusp of a house. If like the 9th house started in Cancer and the 8th house started in Taurus and Gemini was just kind of this slice in between, that's kind of a true interception. But I call it an interception if it's a sign that's not ruling the house. So Taurus is ruling his 8th house, Gemini is intercepting it, and these planets are in that interception of Gemini, which is actually trining. Well, it's a wide orb trine to his Uranus, but anyways, okay, so when it erupts, this conjunction, Neptune conjunct Pluto, is bumping around here unaspected in the 8th house, and I would argue intercepted as well. So when it erupts, it's likely to do so in a completely uncontrolled way because there's nothing in the chart to help channel it. Hitler was part of the fabric of his time and was a mouthpiece for the Pluto-Neptune conjunction. He no doubt there were other mouthpieces as well, some of a much more creative and beneficent kind, but he met the requirements of his time. And I believe Mussolini came up around this time, and Napoleon as well. So that's interesting to note. No doubt there were, okay, so, but he met the requirements of his time. I think it is a mistake to make him responsible for them. I wouldn't say that, but There were a good many civilized and liberal-minded Englishmen and Frenchmen who thought at first that he might be able to do something really constructive in Germany. Because this mystical vision of rebuilding society was around in the collective, not just in Hitler, this conjunction occurred everywhere, not just in Germany. Japan and Italy polarized with Germany, but they could not have done so if there were not some innate receptivity to the vision. So that would be Mussolini in Italy, I believe, and then Japan, in World War II bombed Pearl Harbor, so they were in alliance with Germany as well. A whole generation was born with Pluto conjuncting Neptune, including the German Jews who were victimized and the Allied armies who fought Germany and Italy and Japan. So she's saying, you know, Germany, Italy, and Japan were all in alignment with this in their own way, but the United States and the Allies were in alignment in another way. And the victims, Pluto also is destruction and death. So, in a way, the German Jews were victimized by Pluto, the Pluto-Neptune conjunction. Also, Neptune going back to a type of religious spirituality. So, right? So, I hate to say it. I don't know how to say this. It's like a religious group died. A Neptunian group died in a Pluto fashion. Okay. So whether you were, no matter what side you were on, whether you were an ally, whether you were one of the aggressors or one of the victims, they were all being influenced by the Neptune-Pluto conjunction in mildly different ways. But because these are collective planets, it was large collectives of people. So the large collective of allies was influenced in one way. The large collective of victims was influenced in another. It was kind of forced upon them. And then the large collective of the, let's say, aggressors, just to keep it simple, or allies to that, were sort of seeing this Neptunian illusion in another way. They were sort of under the delusion or the shadow side of Neptune, thinking that this destruction needed to happen, that it was okay. Whereas for the Jews, it was more like their religious sense, is why they were being attacked, or cultural. And then for the Allies, it was like the moral right to do good. This is amoral. They were maybe not under the delusion of Neptune so much, but under sort of the higher octave. Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. It's a really high spiritual love. Like if you were going to speak religion, like the ninth house in Sagittarius would be like going to church and bowing and doing all of that, following the rules of the book of the written word. But when we get to the 12th house Neptune religion, that is more about having a personal relationship with God, or praying, or connecting with the spiritual realm, things like that. So anyways, there can still be Neptunian influences in dogmatic Sagittarian religions and vice versa. Because remember, I don't know, Jupiter was the traditional ruler of Pisces, which is shared with Sagittarius, 9th house, 12th house. All right. Anyways, okay. The eruption of the collective vision of this generation belonged as much to the good side as the bad side. Kind of what I was just saying. Just as the same experience binds the rapist and the raped, or the murderer and the murdered. One may well ask why what erupted was so, it's like you can't have one without the other, right? One may ask why what erupted was so particularly odious. I don't think this odiousness is inherent in the conjunction, although one would expect Pluto and Neptune to produce something drastic and obsessive for good or ill. But I think if energies like this, which contain both a dark and a light pole, try to surface through a particular kind of cultural lopsidedness or paralysis, then the likelihood is that it is predominantly the dark face which will reveal itself. So if it's left unchecked, basically. The same principle, I think, applies both to an individual and to a nation. If an individual is lopsided and overdeveloped in one direction and frozen and twisted and underdeveloped in another, then the eruption of the unconscious brings up the lopsided shadow with it. I don't feel it's coincidental that both Pluto and Neptune are feminine planets. See, I don't know. Scorpio is a feminine sign, But Libra is a masculine sign and ruled by Venus, a feminine planet. So I would argue, I feel Pluto is a masculine energy, but Liz Green thinks it's a feminine energy. So, because Pluto in Greek mythology represented, which one was it? Kronos was the father. I don't, I just refer to this. He represents a male god in Greek mythology. Pluto does. Anyways, I believe it's Hades that Pluto represents, who is a male Greek god. But I feel like, thinks more of Pluto as how I think of Lilith. We talked about that. So if you've been following along, I don't want to be redundant, but if you haven't, go back and check it out. All right. There's a playlist. I usually link it in the description box below. I didn't today, but it will be in the playback. It'll be linked in the description box and pinned in the comments. You can find all the previous videos for this book study. So anyways, I don't feel it's coincidental that both Pluto and Neptune are feminine planets dealing with the emotional, instinctual, and imaginal realms. Now, as far as Pluto ruling Scorpio, which is a feminine sign, and I would say in a way Libra and Scorpio might be two of the most balanced feminine and masculine signs inherently in their own ways. Maybe Libra a little more on the masculine side, a little more outspoken, and then but wanting to please, and then Scorpio being very introverted generally, and feminine and receptive and intuitive, like she's saying, but also being very strong, which is a little bit more of a masculine association. All right. So, anyways, with the emotional and intellect, okay, Germany has always been a peculiarly patriarchal culture whose chief deity was a male storm god, Wotan, or Wotan, but I think it's Wotan. The development of the feminine side of the psyche in Germany was perhaps rather handicapped by the bias of the cultural values. So when these two feminine planets burst through, it would seem reasonable to suppose that they would behave in a pretty archaic way when they did. You can see that without hindsight, one could not determine this was Hitler's chart. But you could determine that this is an individual who has a propensity to be taken over by the collective unconscious. If you bear this in mind and then consider his 10th house Saturn in Leo, with its suggestion of personal ambition and almost overwhelming need to compensate for his loneliness and isolation and repressed anger through public recognition. Oh, 10th house, yeah. Leo sort of needs the glory, and Saturn on the 10th house is what Saturn rules. It's traditionally Capricorn's house. So Saturn could really, it's like, if Leo likes to be seen or is naturally seen, Saturn could be like, hold on, you need to stay inside and work, you know? And Leo's like, but I just kind of want to play, And Saturn's like, no, you have to work. Like, and then it's, up there on the, yeah, it's a very repressive energy for Leo. But then again, Leo is a sun, so that could also bring a lot of success to Saturn being there, which is why he did get to be well known. 10th house is reputation and parts a lot of fame. Fame has to do with the 10th house. Like a Leo, I told you guys, a Leo midheaven, a lot of famous people have Leo midheavens. And even if, I think I kind of got sidetracked yesterday, even if you're not famous and you have a Leo midheaven, you're going to be very popular amongst your circles. Like whether it be your friends group, your family, your community, you're going to be well known and usually well liked, depending on how it's aspected. Okay. Anyways, so let's just go. If you bear this in mind and then consider the 10th house Saturn in Leo with his suggestion of personal ambition and almost overwhelming need to compensate for his loneliness and isolation and repressed anger through public recognition, then you can see how the two separate things might combine. The 10th house Saturn also describes the very difficult mother relationship he had, with a domineering and overpossessive mother and a father who died when he was quite young. This kind of family background and rather neurotic drive are not especially uncommon. Yeah, definitely when you see Capricorn or Saturn on the, well, it's supposed to be the midheaven, but on the IC too. Um, this kind of family background, okay, the insecurity and ambition would naturally force him to seek recognition, and to seek it in a distorted way with rather grandiose fantasies of his own importance and talent. As soon as he achieves any position of this kind, then the Pluto Neptune drive would begin to push through into the public eye. Also, we have to, oh no, it's sextiling. The eighth house, where he has the Pluto Neptune conjunction, would be sextiling his 10th house. Yeah, because it's in Gemini, sextiling Libra, um, sextiling Leo. 13 degrees. It's a little bit of a wide orb sextile, but it'd be sextiling. So, you can then put these things together with the Mercury opposition, the Mercury Uranus opposition across the ascendant descendant axis. I was talking a lot about that yesterday, which suggests a very fine capacity to grasp the intricacies of an ideology or political system and articulate it in a Libran, like Libra, that is logical and reasonable way. I think the key to the whole chart is the unaspected Pluto-Neptune conjunction. Now, all this hindsight is very nice, but the problem is that when a conjunction like this is percolating in the collective, an entire generation is bound to it without being at all aware of what is happening. The ordinary, because that's really Neptune putting sort of that fog up where they can't really see the destruction that Pluto is causing. So it's almost like Pluto's going, we have to destroy everything, and Neptune's going, all right. It's almost like Pluto's like a mass murderer, right, on the loose, and he's killing everyone, and Neptune's like cloaking him so that he can't be found. Okay. Or that when he is seen, oh, my eyes just got all crazy. When he is seen, he's not recognized as the murderer, right? He could be the pillar of society, right? And that's kind of, Hitler here. So at the time, that's how he got into power, is he kind of fooled everyone into thinking that he was this pillar, right, with the right ideas, until they were acting on these Pluto drives of destruction and death, and then Neptune was still kind of hiding it for a while till it became undeniable. That's why it took like the United States so long to intervene and things like that. I'm just putting this in a nutshell. I know that's somewhat historically factual. I'm sure somebody who's very historically educated could elaborate much more on why it took a long time for the United States to intervene and all of that. I'm just saying it's why we didn't see it right away. Okay, what was going on in Europe, all right? And then I know there was another reason we held off for a little while, so that's what I was saying about the details. But anyways, not all this hindsight is very nice, but the problem is that when a conjunction like this is percolating in the collective, and an entire generation is bound to it without being aware, the ordinary decent citizen who lives on the surface of life, be he English, American, German, French, Italian, or whatever, sits around with his rather narrow vision of reality, and then suddenly, the next thing he knows, there is an oppressive government in power, left or right, and then he shrugs and says, quote, "Well, I was only following orders. What could I have done?" End quote. They would have shot me if I had argued. And he never puts two and two together. That he and his millions of fellows, if they had been just a little more conscious, would have seen what was happening in the world outside, because they would have seen it in themselves first. So, like, I know that was a big, as you're growing up and you're learning about the Holocaust and stuff, that was a hard thing for me to wrap my head around for a while. Is like, how could all these people be so stupid and not see what was going on and stop it? As they really, and not like defending it, but like they really were in this sort of trance, and I kind of, the way I'm like, oh, okay, propaganda, and they were fooled and they were tricked, not saying like the people that executed certain things aren't equally as culpable. That's not, what we're here to discuss. I'm just saying it took me a long time to wrap my head around that, and that's very much Neptune's part in this. Okay, so this is why I tend to keep on going on and on about what these things represent within the individual. Because if is a potent outer planet influence in your own horoscope, then there is a powerful current at work in your generation group and therefore in you. So like I said, for me, it's Saturn conjunct Uranus. If you or I don't understand what this is about, then someone else will sooner or later announce it by saying, quote, I am the voice who can answer all of your aspirations. I am the one who knows better than you what you need, end quote. And then you're caught, hypnotized, and you follow, and then you cease to be an individual at all. And I would say, especially in a Neptune type of generational conjunction, there's more of, Pluto too. Those are going to be the two planets and houses that are you're going to find hypnotism in for the most part. Maybe even the IC Cancer energy a little bit. The private life. But yeah, so anyways, so she's saying like with all generational aspects, there's going to be some of that. I'm going to say especially those that are dealing with Pluto or Neptune, which in this case, we're talking about the Pluto-Neptune conjunction. So now let's move on to Karl Marx's chart in the Uranus-Neptune conjunction under which he was born. These two planets together suggest a mystical or religious vision coupled with a political ideology. So she interprets Uranus as political ideology, referring to it as the ruler of Aquarius. Yes, it is social networks. I think of ideology more as Sagittarian energy, maybe Jupiter. I don't. Jupiter isn't really ideal. Well, it can be to an extent. It's more, yeah. I feel like it's more Jupiterian in my book. But anyways, the Plutonian element is absent here in the conjunction, but Saturn and Pluto are in square to it. We can deal with the Uranus-Neptune conjunction first. Ooh, that's brutal. So for those born around 1818 when Karl Marx was born, they had Uranus-Neptune conjunction squaring Saturn and Pluto. And let's see. Saturn was in... Oh, and well, they're like in a wide... no. Like Saturn and Pluto. Oh, okay, so Pluto particularly is squaring Neptune and Saturn is squaring Uranus, but Neptune and Uranus are within like 6-degree orb, and then Saturn and Pluto are kind of outside of that orb, so they're about 9 degrees apart, but they're aspecting the two. So it's like these two planets and then these two planets, but then it aspects kind of like that. Just keep it simple and keep it moving. This is another individual who, so Karl Marx, I'll show you his birth chart real quick. He was born May 5th, so he's a Taurus as well, 1818 at 2 a.m. in Treves, Prussia, and the Sabian symbol is Jones. Or 2 a.m. is recorded. Jones Sabian symbols gives 1:30 a.m. So this is his... Sabian symbols are pretty cool. We should do a video on that one day if you guys don't know what that is. But here we go. That's his birth chart if you want to take a screenshot and follow along. All right. This is another individual who's... Maybe I should put it there a second longer. Okay, screenshot. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Get my fingers out of the way. 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. This is another individual who's born at a time when the collective was seized with the germ of a new vision. The conjunction falls in Mark's 10th house, which suggests that his calling... And so now that's interesting too, that they both have these... Oh no, he had Saturn on the 10th. Okay, I lied. All right. They both have planets on the 10th too. So aside from like being a Leo midheaven and being famous, also having a planet on your midheaven can create fame. Johnny Depp has Venus on his midheaven. So not just having a midheaven in Leo, which is like a 10th house, the top of the chart, it's reputation and fame. Also having a planet up there. Again, if you're not world famous, you will be well known in your circles around you, you know, on whatever scale. Also could depend on the sign. And then your 7th house and your ascendant would play a role as well. Hitler had Uranus close to his ascendant. Not that close, though, but she made it sound kind of like it was. Anyways, so the conjunction falls in Mark's 10th house, which suggests that his calling or vocation would be intimately connected to giving that vision form in society. In Hitler's chart, the outer planet conjunction falls in a watery house, the 8th. It's lurking in the unconscious. Hitler wasn't quote unquote called in the sense of a vocation. He was called to aggrandize himself personally and became a victim of this unconscious conjunction. But with Marx, you might say that he felt personally impelled to contribute this philosophy, even though it isn't really his. The political religious vision of Uranus Neptune is really Marx's profession. I find it interesting that it's because also the 10th house rules vocation and profession. Like your career is how I usually say it. I find it's interesting that it's pitted against, so the midheaven is career, the 6th house is the actual work you do every day, and the 2nd house is how well you get paid. All right. I told you guys we might do a video on that, but if you want to look up a vocational chart for yourself, divinetimingdatabase.com, if you create the database and put in your birth time, there's a vocational reading that you can do for yourself. Anyways, okay. But with Marx, you might say that he felt personally impelled to contribute this philosophy, even though it really isn't his. The political religious vision of Uranus Neptune is really Marx's profession. I find it interesting that it's pitted against Saturn and Pluto in the 1st house of the chart, which is an actual interception. So if you guys were following along to that, it's in Pisces. So his ascendant, his 1st house is ruled by Aquarius, and then Aries rules his 2nd house. So Aries starts. So Pisces is literally intercepted in his 1st house with a Saturn Pluto conjunction at a wide orb, 9 degrees. But Saturn and Pluto are also officially intercepted in the intercepted sign of Pisces in his 1st house. So he has 3 signs in his 1st house with 2 intercepted planets in there. But I told you guys I still would consider it an interception even if Pisces ruled the 2nd house. But it's good to make the distinction because one day I might go, oh, okay, kind of like an inside moon conjunction and an outside moon conjunction in synastry. I might go, okay, these type of interceptions, like the official ones, they play out with a certain flavor or way, where the ones that are sort of bleeding into the next house, there's another distinction there as well. But nothing specific right now in my mind about that, but it's definitely good to note for later. All right. So he was called to, okay. Now I mentioned, okay, I find it interesting. It's pitted against Saturn and Pluto in the 1st house and they're intercepted. Although Saturn and Pluto are not technically in conjunction, right? They're 9 degrees apart. Both are in square to the Uranus-Neptune conjunction. That's what I was kind of explaining because they're like going like that. Now, I mentioned before that neither Saturn nor Pluto are especially fond of authority. They are the authorities, really, especially Saturn. Saturn is government and authority, which is also 10th house, which Saturn rules. Because both of these planets try to claim authority for themselves. So I just got to keep reading. Okay. On a personal level, Marx was an autocrat. He had a terrifically domineering personality. That's interesting because I wouldn't think that of Marx. I've read some of his works. To me, he seemed like he just wanted everyone to succeed. That was sort of his ideal, that everything would be equal, equal distribution. But that's my understanding anyways. In Hitler's chart, there isn't really a conflict. He was just rolled along by the power of the Pluto-Neptune conjunction. But I think that Marx probably suffered. I think also, though, Hitler had a bit of insanity with the Mercury opposition, Uranus. And I think that's where he had all this power with that. But he also was very erratic and created a lot of chaos, right? Anyways, and there was a lot of consequences to that. But I think that Marx probably suffered from this conflict between his principles and his personality. So she's saying the Saturn-Pluto square to the Neptune-Uranus conjunction. Here is someone who believes in freedom yet is personally autocratic. I think also that Marxism contains a kind of projection of one end of this conflict. The tyrannical controlling enemy is found without rather than within. These squares between Saturn and Pluto and the Uranus-Neptune conjunction are very difficult, and it isn't surprising that even a man of Marx's intellectual stature couldn't cope with the ambivalence of being both a dictator and a member of the ordinary mass. The fantasy of a perfect state, which is like a benign mother god, taking care of each individual and free of greed and aggression, is, I think, very much the kind of image I would associate with the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, especially as this conjunction falls in Sagittarius, which is prone to be terribly idealistic anyways. As I was saying, ideology is Jupiter, it's Sagittarius, so it all ties back together. But Saturn is in the first house will always see Saturn in the first house is just someone who's going to have control of things to protect its own territory first, because it's much too cynical to believe that people can will themselves into altruism because of a theory. And Pluto, of course, obeys jungle law because it's also too realistic about the darker aspects of human nature to trust in anyone doing something just because it might help humanity. I find this chart very interesting because you cannot separate a philosophy or a psychological system from the person who propounds it. I am also very interested in the way in which Marxism is interpreted. Whatever Marx meant by his vision, it has certainly taken on some strange forms in the 20th century. Most Marxists that I have met are very annoyed if I suggest that their political system is really a religious vision. Because the Marxist is supposed to be militantly aesthetic, but militant atheistic. Oh yeah, because the Marxist is supposed to be militantly atheistic. But militant atheism is, in American jargon, a dead giveaway, because if a person is really an atheist, he simply doesn't care. If he's militant, he's trying to stamp out something in himself. I would like you now to look at Lenin's chart, which I have put up on the board, because it's quite fascinating to see the way in which Lenin interpreted Marx. Are there any questions or comments first about these two charts? Now, Lenin sang the song Imagine, right? Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. And he was born in 1870. Marx was born in 1818. So I'm real curious to see what's going on with Lenin's Neptune, because Lenin is definitely, I wouldn't be surprised if he has something going on with Jupiter and Neptune together. Maybe like Jupiter in the second house, which gives him lots of wealth, trining his Neptune on the midheaven, which gave him a voice. You know, Neptune can very much rule singing and hypnotizing the masses, right? It also rules the dark room, the 12th house of film and cinema. So, you know, on Neptune, I kind of peeked. It's not, Neptune's not on his midheaven, but that sort of would be my guess. It's on his in his fourth house, so it's in opposition to his midheaven on his IC. So I'm going to, let's see, where does this go? Okay, we're going into John Lennon's birth chart. He was one of the famous Beatles who had a great solo career. Let's see here. I'm seeing how much long lecture 3 is if we can get through it today, because I probably can stay on for about 10 more minutes. I'll do about hour blocks at a time too, so you can, you know, swallow it in the playbacks and not just choke on it, right? We'll take small doses of the medicine. Intermittent reinforcement helps us remember things better anyways and get more out of them. So the audience says, both Hitler and Marx have the sun in Taurus. Can you comment on that? Now, I did point that out to you guys. Liz, only the usual, which is, and we talked about this a little yesterday, so I'm curious to see what she says. Which is to which is to stutter. No. Only the literal, which is to describe the basic characteristics of Taurus, which you all know. The sun describes what a person is really like, what kinds of things he personally values and wants to express in his life. In Hitler's case, I fear it was mainly the more negative aspects of Taurus that showed themselves. That's why I said, you guys, the shadow side, because there was so little room for a healthy personality to express itself. Taurus is a deeply sensual and physical sign, and the squares of Venus and Mars to Saturn suggest that any opportunity of living this sensual nature in a harmonious way was blocked by fear and isolation and mistrust. I think that if you frustrate something so basic, it turns cruel. And I think it was this book we were talking about. it was something like it might have been a theory in this book we came across, but it's something I was reading recently. I think it was in here in like lecture one. If we don't, and I think this phone's distracting me. It might have been a Freudian or Jungian term that she mentioned. I don't remember. It was some kind of like Latin term that means like if you're not basically procreating or creating, you have a death wish. It was like a term, and you're destroying. I think it was Freud that said it. So, um, sensuality, Venus rules the Empress in the tarot, which is the mother. So if you're not procreating, especially with Scorpio or Taurus, Pluto or Venus type of placements very strongly, it can turn into sort of a death wish or destruction, right? I believe, was it him? Yeah, it was his chart. Taurus rules the 8th house, which is the opposite because he has somewhat of a reverse natural chart. Slightly off, but um, so Venus and Mars and Saturn suggest that any opportunity of living this sensual nature in a harmonious way was blocked by fear and isolation and mistrust. I think that if you frustrate something so basic, it turns cruel. I have seen this before with both Taurus and Scorpio. My goodness. Man, I feel like I read this book before. Because both signs are so instinctual and cannot really reflect reasonably on the causes of their frustration without considerable effort. Interesting, because I just mentioned something like that. So they turn vicious out of hurt and rage. If you frustrate the sensuality that is inherent in Taurus, it can turn brutal. What sign was his Venus Mars conjunction in? Taurus, yeah, okay. But I don't really think the historical Hitler that we see in film clips has any Taurus left to show. There's nothing but Pluto Neptune pouring out. So she's kind of saying, yeah, he was a Taurus. Yeah, he was a Libra rising. He had a Venus Mars conjunction in Taurus. Those are all really good things to have. Uh, what we're seeing in the maniac that is on TV is a man who's utterly devoid of himself and just channeling the Pluto Neptune conjunction, which is destroy under this illusion of propaganda, right? So the Saturn and Leo on the midheaven, made him feel that he had to rise up and show himself. And Saturn is a dictator. But she's saying basically that he was more channeling this Pluto Neptune thing of destruction, um, in a nutshell. So she's saying we can't blame the sign of Taurus for what Hitler did, obviously, right? Anyways, audience, it's interesting that Hitler had a knowledge and interest in astrology. I didn't know that. Okay. I knew like Freud and Jung did, especially Jung, but there's a bunch of stuff I still want to read on that on the Jung website. But anyways, I wonder to what extent he manipulated that knowledge to support his political ideas. Liz, to a great extent. Very interesting. It's pretty common knowledge now that Hitler had a stable full of astrologers to advise him, like many kings did as well. I'm not comparing him to a king, but even the kings in the Bible had astrologers. Um, anyways, and when they began to advise him with warnings instead of promises of victory, he began to shoot them. It's a very risky profession, being a high-level astrologist. um, There was an immense revival of magical cults during Hitler's rule. That's a lot to do with Neptune as well. And Pluto Neptune conjunction, right? So it's like you got this one side of it where there's like this religious, um, you know, destruction thing going on. And then you've got the other side of it where it's like, oh, we have the occult Pluto and we have the mystical Neptune. So this was the revival of what we're still living out today. I feel like it was muted for a time, maybe, or maybe in the 50s. I don't know. Anyways, I'm just exploring too much now. All right. There was there was an immense revival of magical cults during Hitler's rule, and military orders like the SS were quite heavily steeped in ritual magic. I didn't know this. Okay. There is quite a lot of interesting literature available on the influence of occult societies before and during the Third Reich. One thing I did know that I think would be interesting to insert here, and again, I don't know all the details, but I did hear, I've heard before that and this is just part of it. I know it's just a piece, but when I was trying to figure out, just learning it through the years and through school, like, why did he target the Jews and stuff like that? Someone once told me, and this I'm sure is only a small part of it as well, but that is because the Jews were very educated parts of society. They were like the doctors and lawyers, and they had accumulated quite a bit of wealth. And so some would say even today, like a lot of the wealthy people in the United States, a lot of like, Jews make up a large percent of like the top percent. They say some people say that's not true. I think it's fairly accurate. But anyways, because and I, it's just the discipline of the culture of the family structure. They're just, it's kind of like in Asian societies, they're really good at bringing their kids up in math and stuff. So it's just, I think that's part of it as well. But somebody told me that because of that, that it was almost like the Nazis were, they didn't say it this way, but like pirates. They were like coming to steal their gold and steal their assets and steal their knowledge. And there's like a lot of mysticism in Judaism as well, like the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and things like that. So it makes me wonder if, I do believe in spiritual warfare, and everything with that sense is spiritual warfare in a way, whether it's being enacted on the physical plane, right? Like Pluto and Neptune are gods, and rule the spiritual plane just as much as the physical, especially those two operate on the spiritual plane. So with that being said, it really makes me think too that maybe with what in line with that what that person said about them coming to take their jewels and their treasures, and because they had really established some wealth, and maybe even their knowledge and their wisdom, they might have been stealing their mysticism as partially like a spiritual warfare. And also some people, because I like to watch like um stuff on the Bible about, like, because the end of times is always interesting to all of us, right? And I like to say like uh they'll go with the theories like, this is revelations, this is how these wars that are predictive have played out over the years. And it's like you can align it so many ways, and there are so many theories, but I always think it's interesting to listen to, just like past lives. It's like, well, was it these three wars that they're talking about in Revelations, or have these wars even come yet? Or 1,000 years is a day in God's eye, so 1,000 years times 1,000, 365 days, right? So I'm just going, you know um on that note, there's probably a little bit of them stealing some of their mysticism and knowledge as well. Um, anyways, I suppose these two were part of the Pluto-Neptune vision to which he was sensitive. He certainly manipulated all of it. Even the silver and black that dominate the visual presentation of the Reich are symbolic, ceremonial colors, and the swastika is an ancient symbol. There was a very extensive knowledge of the use of such things in Hitler's party. It's certainly very Plutonian because it plays on the unconscious of the nation. They do that to this day, right? Like Freemasonry symbols and stuff like that, to advertise to us today. Not obviously Nazis, but I'm just saying our own media, and they, use symbols to sell something on a massive scale. Both these charts show the potential for a certain kind of personality, which with certain kinds of motivations. Okay. The missing piece to the mystery of why people like Marx and Hitler affect the world so profoundly lies, I think, in the world rather than in the horoscopes. If the collective needs a particular kind of mouthpiece for its inarticulate longings and needs, then it will find one. Marx seems to have been more of a Taurus than Hitler because he managed to live a stable family life in a rather traditional way. Also, we're not really mentioning here that Hitler was on the cusp of Aries, the god of war. So that definitely brings, I would say Aries and Taurus are the two most headstrong signs in the zodiac. So, I'm an Aries, so I'm not knocking y'all. I'm just saying. So that definitely brings quite a different dynamic than a May Taurus like Marx. But no one would have paid any attention to Das Kapital if it had not embodied something that answered a secret collective longing for the people. So, I'm going to have to pause because I do have to go. We have to get some stuff ready for Thanksgiving tomorrow. So we'll leave off on page 65, going kind of comparing these two charts. And then we're going to get into John Lennon's birth chart is on the next page. So I'm looking forward to that. Oh, wait. Yeah. Oh, no. She's talking about Nikolai Lenin in Russia. So that'll be interesting. She's not talking about John Lennon. So I'm going to leave it there for today. It's getting really good. Like some of the connotations that she makes, it's like, okay, boring, boring, history, history. Oh my gosh, that's really crazy fact. Like, oh, they were actually using mysticism, which we know, but, you know, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I may have heard that before, but it never really clicked that he had a bunch of astrologists at his disposal. It's like, yeah, like I said, kings had astrologists. One of my goals as an astrologist, for a minute, someone had talked to me, it was like just to have like, because someone I knew in LA was talking about how there was this lady that worked with high profile clients. So I was like, oh, if I could get like 10 clients on a retainer, like I wouldn't even be available for small readings, you know, because it is get a little monotonous, you know. And then I ended up having a client on retainer for several months. So for something that was happening in the immediate time. So and it was like right around that time. But if you just want a reading from me, I'm not on retainer. I have pretty affordable rates. We can in-depth go through your birth chart. If you order a birth chart reading from me at rotation411.com, I will literally start at your ascendant. Let me show you guys a birth chart real quick. Going back to, I'll literally tell you what all this means. We'll start here and I'll tell you what your first house sign is, what it means for you, what planets in it mean, what they're aspecting, and I'll go through it bit by bit. So it's pretty cool. If you're not going to get it from me, you should definitely get one done in this lifetime because it can illuminate a lot for you, give you a lot of breakthroughs in your life. Also, if you've been dating online and you haven't met anyone or anyone of substance, then why not check out moonmatch.love, enter the database, see if you have any matches in there, you guys. I don't know what you're waiting for. We have so many people in there and we've had a lot of matches, but there's so many more people to be matched. So if you're on dating sites right now, you need, and if you're on, you know, if you're using Pattern and CoStar and Match.com and all of that, you need to check out moonmatch.love. You can use my coupon code rotation411 and you can get 50% off if you use the Thanksgiving code on there now through the end of the month. I'm sending you all lots of love, blessings, and light. I probably won't be on for Thanksgiving tomorrow. I will try to pop back on Friday, probably be early in the morning Pacific Standard Time, and I may be able to get on Saturday this week because I really want to get through lecture 3. It's getting good, and we have 7 lectures total to go through. So also, just sort of a side note, I am starting I'm going to go back to school for something starting in January, but hopefully I'll be able to balance it with this and keep being consistent. So it would be nice if we can get through this book in December. I mean, we're almost halfway through it. So it would be nice if we can get it done in December. All right, I'm sending you all lots of love and light.